Hi there, I'm Lance, and this is Love to Hate, where we help gamers find great games to play with non-gamers. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to play the 2 to 4 player game Prognosis Death from Flying Man Games, who helped sponsor this video. In Prognosis Death, players are rival doctors trying to take credit for curing a patient of his plethora of ailments. Collect symptom cards to put together your diagnosis while at the same time refuting other players' diagnoses. But make sure not to take too long, otherwise the patient will perish. In Prognosis Death, the goal is to have the lowest score of cards in your hand if the patient discharges. Or if the patient perishes, make sure to have the highest score of cards in your hand at the end of the game. Before going any further, it's important to note that Prognosis Death can be played on one of 4 complexity levels, helping players ease their way into the game to learn all the rules. If you're a beginner, we suggest playing on the beginner level. However, if you're an experienced board or card game player, the publisher recommends playing the game on the advanced level.
For this level, you will only use the following 3 elements on all the cards: the color, the suit, and the value. Ignore all other icons and effects. For intermediate, you will also include retrieve effects, which are indicated by this icon here. I'll explain what retrieve effects are in a little bit. At the advanced level, you will play with all aspects of the card, which include diagnosis and discard abilities. We'll cover what these are later on. You'll also include the 2 ailment cards to the deck.
And finally, at the Advanced Plus level, you're not allowed to look at the cards that you've revealed to the other players. Again, I'll explain what that means later on.
For setup, simply shuffle all the cards together to form a draw pile. Make sure not to include the 2 ailment cards if you're playing on the beginner or intermediate complexity levels. Next, deal 10 cards to each player, leaving the rest of the deck face down in the center of the table. Then deal 1 additional card face up to each player. Players will compare the first letter of the name of the card that was dealt face up to them. Whoever is first in the alphabet gets to go first. This may be the only time it's good to have dysentery. Lastly, each player will take the card that was dealt face up to them and place it in the center of the table next to the draw pile to form a discard pile.
Using the cards that you've been dealt, you'll perform the following 4 steps on your turn in this specific order. First, draw or retrieve a card. Second, challenge a diagnosis. Third, discharge the patient. And finally, fourth, diagnose or discard. Note that steps 2 and 3 are optional. We'll cover each of these steps, starting with draw or retrieve a card. The first thing a player will do on their turn is decide if they want to draw or retrieve a card. To draw a card, simply take one off the top of the draw deck and add it to your hand.
If instead you want to retrieve a card, take a card from the discard area and add it to your hand. If you're playing at the intermediate level or higher, look at the retrieve icon on the card you're retrieving. If the eye is facing towards you, this means you have to reveal a card in your hand. If instead you retrieve a card with the eye looking away from you, this means you get to pick another player to have to reveal a card in their hand.
To reveal a card, simply choose a card that you have in hand and turn it away from you. Like so. Now that I've turned it away from me, I won't be able to use this card for the rest of the game. It will stay in my hand, and the points on it will count towards my score at the end of the game. Also, the other players at the table will be able to use this card if they so choose to do so on their turn. Steps 2 and 3 are challenge and discharge the patient, respectively. Now, both of these steps are optional, and you can't do either one of them until a diagnosis has been made in the game. So we'll come back to understand what those 2 steps are about, but first we need to learn about diagnose or discard. The 4th and final step of a turn is to either diagnose or discard. Players will want to formulate a diagnosis at some point in the game, as it is a good way to get rid of cards out of your hand. Plus, it is one way to help move the game towards the end game.
In order to diagnose, you must play a set of at least 4 cards of one color, or 5 cards of one suit. These are minimum requirements, so you can play more than 4 cards of one color or 5 cards of one suit if you have them.
Remember, only the cards that are facing you are available to you to use to make diagnoses. So the cards in your hand that are facing away from you, you can't use. But you can use the cards that are facing you in other players' hands.
When playing your Diagnose set, lay the cards face up in front of you, making sure to leave the subname of each card visible. Make sure to be aware of what card you put on top of your Diagnosis set, because if it has this icon on it, you get to perform the action listed on the card here.
And then in your best doctorly voice, announce your diagnosis to the other players by reading off every subname of the cards that you have in your set and the main name of the card that you have on top of your set. For example, I believe the patient has advanced, stubborn, dreadful, unstoppable boils. Poor fella. If you can't make a diagnosis set or you don't want to play one, you have to discard a card instead. Simply choose a card that's available to you and put it in the discard area. Now remember, you can only choose the cards that are facing you. You can't choose the ones that you've already revealed. And for this step, you can only discard a card that's in your hand. Even though other players may have cards that are facing you, you cannot choose that card to discard.
If the card you're discarding has the trash can icon on it, you may perform the ability on the card. Also, be mindful of how many cards are in the discard pile. If there are ever 8 cards in a 2-player game, 10 cards in a 3-player game, or 12 cards in a 4-player game, the patient dies and the game ends immediately. We'll cover what happens in this instance in a little while.
Now back to the second step on a turn, challenge. Remember, this step is optional, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to, and it can only be done once a diagnosis set has been played in the game. To challenge, simply choose one of the cards that's accessible to you, either in your hand or in one of the other players' hands, and add it to a matching set of either color or suit.
For example, My Yellow Parasites card could be played to challenge this diagnosis set here, because it matches with the color yellow. Or it could be played to challenge this set here, because it matches the suit of the medicine pill.
You can repeat the challenge step an unlimited number of times on your turn, so long as you have the right cards available to you to play on the diagnoses that are on the table at the time. You can even challenge your own diagnoses, which you may want to do if you're not ready for the game to end yet and you want to get rid of cards that are in your hand. Remember, you can only use cards that are available to you, meaning the cards facing you in your hand and the cards facing you in the other player's hands. The third step of a player's turn is the Discharge the Patient step. Now this is optional, and you only want to do it if you're confident that you're going to win the game, because once a player chooses to discharge the patient, the game is immediately over, and you'll proceed to endgame scoring. Now in order to do this, you have to have at least one diagnosis set in front of you. Also, you cannot have had any of your diagnoses challenged since your previous turn.
For example, if the active player has the following diagnoses in front of them, they are only able to discharge the patient if no player, including themselves, have challenged any of their diagnoses since the active player's previous turn.
In other words, when a player has a diagnosis set in front of them, they can choose to end the game if no one chooses to challenge any of that player's diagnoses. Additionally, once a player has diagnoses in front of them, they will need to continually have their diagnoses challenged. Otherwise, they can choose to end the game at any turn when they have none of their diagnoses challenged. Now, if an eligible player chooses to discharge the patient, the game ends and immediately proceeds to the endgame scoring, which we'll cover right now. The game can end in one of two ways, either discharging the patient or the patient perishing, and each have their own way of scoring to determine the winner. We'll cover both of them, starting with discharging the patient. If a player was able to discharge the patient on their turn, proceed forward with the following steps to determine who is the winner. First, all the other players at the table who did not trigger the endgame, they will get to challenge as many times as they're able to any diagnose on the table. This is a good way to get rid of cards out of your hand right before the game ends. Secondly, all the other players will get one chance to be able to play a diagnosis set if they have one available to them. Now, the player who triggered the endgame will not get to do either one of those steps. So make sure if you are discharging the patient that you're confident that you're going to win, because you will not be able to get rid of any more cards out of your hand. Finally, everyone will count up all of the points on their cards, both the cards that are facing them and facing away. The player who has the lowest score in hand is the winner.
For example, this hand has a total of 19 points showing, but we must add this face down card of 9 points to the total as well, giving us a total score of 28. Not great. If instead either the draw deck runs out of cards, or the discard pile has too many cards in it, 8 in a 2-player game, 10 in a 3-player game, or 12 in a 4-player game, then the patient has succumbed to their illness. The winner is the player who has the highest point total in their hands, both revealed and unrevealed cards. And one final tidbit on the Ailment cards, which you only play with if you're playing on the Advanced or the Advanced Plus complexity levels. You won't be able to diagnose or challenge with these cards, but you will be able to play their discard effect and their retrieve effect.
And that's all you need to know to play Prognosis Death. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down below in the comments section, and I'll make sure to answer them when I get a chance. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to be notified of all of our great new content. I'm Lance, and this is Love to Hate, where we try to bridge the gap between gamers and non-gamers. We'll catch you next time.